Today, you're here at the Salon session on economic justice and the innovation economy. Thank you all for coming out. It's like family in here, so I really feel supported. So thank you for the love for all of you who I know. And notice that was a preemptive strike. So I'm hoping that precludes you from heckling me as the session goes on. Get it out there. Thank you in advance for your good participation and behavior. I want to start by thanking Evelyn Burnett, who couldn't be here but was my co-conspirator in creating this session. Evelyn is Vice President of Economic Programs at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress and is one of our foremost leaders in the field. So we really appreciated having her insight in developing this session. We're really excited to bring some stellar folks to you today, and it's my job to moderate, and I won't be here the entire time. I'll make sure that I'll keep my comments brief and allow the panelists to say a word or two about their work, because that's really what I think the meat of this session is about. But I do want to make a few remarks about just where we are in this work. And thank Frontline Solutions for creating a space for us to have these conversations around boys and men of color. I've been coming to a gathering of leaders since the inception, and I can tell you that they just get better and better, and that the work they're doing to create these spaces is really important for the development of the field. You can't have a field, you can't have a movement without having people have the chance to come together. So I'm really appreciative of Marcus Littles and the Frontline Solutions team, all doing wonderful, wonderful work. But this is an important moment for us to have this conversation. As all of you know, the president launched My Brother's Keeper earlier this year. And so there's national attention focused on this issue of boys and men of color and what can be done to improve their outcomes. And so, in this space where we're now having sort of a renewed focus and interest in this population, those of us who have been at the front lines, I think, have a really clear and strategic opportunity to take the reins and lead the charge. A lot of what the president has outlined is very broad and allows the opportunity to really build on what's happening in the field, and that's all of your work. And so I hope that as you're thinking about My Brother's Keeper, as you're thinking about how your work aligns with it, you definitely see some very clear connections. This initiative has come not a moment too late. As we look around the country, we know that by 2043, the nation will be a majority nation of color. And so more than half of the children now under age 5 are children of color. And so we have to prepare for that reality. We have to create the conditions in which all of our young people and all people in general can participate in our society and prosper. And that's really what this session is about. As we think about the millions of people of color who are now living in communities that are impoverished, living in places where cities have the highest rates of joblessness, and people of color who are stuck in jobs that don't necessarily contribute to them being able to support their families. We know that, and the wealth gap being as huge as it is, we know that there's a lot to be done. And these persistent racial inequities undermine our country's moral fabric. It's not just a matter of an economic question, although that is very important. But these inequities tear us apart. And so we have to do something. Not only is the moral fabric of our country in jeopardy, the economic competitiveness and our ability to compete globally is also at risk. And so when we think about our young people of color, you know, our boys and men of color, these are the people who we need to rely on as the demographic change continues. And it's those people who need the knowledge, information, ideas, and skills to be able to compete in this new economy. As a nation, we aspire to be inclusive because it's morally right, but we also know that there is an economic imperative and that no community should live on the fringes. Unfortunately, you know, for communities of color, you know, we are disproportionately marginalized. And so thinking about the strategies, the policies, the practices that are needed to bring people out of the shadows and into an economy where they can fully participate and prosper is what today's session is all about. And at PolicyLink, we talk about that within this phrase of, you know, an all-in economy. And for us, that really is a full employment economy. It's one where everybody who wants a job has a job, and nobody is, you know, sort of excluded based on qualifications, or status. You know, we think about our brothers and sisters who are affected by mass incarceration. You know, way too many, too many, in many instances, are prohibited from you know, the basic things that we take for granted, renting a home, you know, public benefits, participating in having a meaningful job, you know, being able to vote, participating in our society. And so these are the things that I think are incumbent upon us to change as we move forward in thinking about a more equitable economy on behalf of our nation's sons and brothers. So today, you will hear from Ms. Rhonda Tsoi-A-Fatt Bryant, the Director of Youth Policy at CLASP, Alicia Criado, the Economic Policy Field Coordinator at the National Council of Raza, Tim Rainey, who is the Executive Director of the California Workforce Investment Board, Brett Jones, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships, or Strategic Projects, I should say, at the Evergreen Cooperative, and Ngongang, who is the Director of the BMA Fellowship at Echoing Green. These individuals bring a wealth of experience and perspective to this particular question. And I want to start by just basically simply asking, what is an innovation economy? What is economic justice? And each of you have your own perspective on this. And so I'd appreciate it if, you know, you can all speak to the part that, you know, most clearly resonates with you. But I'd like to just open it up and begin there.
All right, I'll start. So for us, when we take a look at innovation economy and wealth creation, and we really see that as an opportunity to create ownership for BMOC. And we think that in order for everybody to have a job, we have to localize ownership and localize these job creations so that when we pay jobs and pay people locally, they can spend money locally, and then as they spend money locally, they create more jobs locally. So, you know, there's nothing against national and global conglomerates. It's certainly, they have their place, but where we see the impact really happening is when we stick money in the pockets of the citizens who live locally, who can then spend money locally.
In my perspective, I support a group of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs working with for-profit and nonprofit social ventures focused on Black men and boys. And when we say innovation economy, or I think about the tools for innovation. I think about the tools to get your ideas out there. And for many of them, that's social capital, that's real capital, and it's intellectual capital. And so I think about how do we increase the access for entrepreneurs to those different capital pools. So is it loans? Is it funding from the philanthropic space? Is it funding from individuals? I think about how do they increase their access to mentors, individuals that have been there before that can help them think through launching their projects. And then I think about how do they get the knowledge. So get access to the knowledge before they're launching their ventures, but then also through the launching of their ventures to ensure that they're sustainable, but also that they're able to make an impact. So I think about innovation from my perspective is access.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. So again, buenos dias, Alicia, Criado with the National Council of La Raza. For those of you that may not be familiar with NCLR, we're the largest Latino civil rights organization in the U.S. I work on our economic policy project, and I think this point of access is key. Our focus is on low-wage Latino workers. And so I think just in general, it's making sure that, folks have both the access to these financial resources, the tools, the training, to make sure that folks are actually competitive, to be able to go out into the labor market and start their business or compete for, many of these new economy kind of innovative jobs. But I think overall for us, we span from everything from, kind of asset building, so making sure folks can actually build the wealth as well, long-term speaking, but then more importantly, making sure people have good quality jobs, right? It's not just one thing to have a job, but we want to make sure that it's jobs that pay living wages, provide paid sick, leave, and really provide that stability in the household.
So at CLASP, the work that we do really focuses in particular on advancing young men and boys of color who are at high risk of being disconnected from education and disconnected from employment because of what both the economic and the educational structures look like in their communities. And so when I think about the issue of economic justice, I really think about the idea that the basis of our economy really is people. It's not, business trades or transactions. The basis of our economy really is people. And it's the idea that everyone should have the opportunity to earn and the opportunity to contribute to the economy so that they're able to earn a living that allows them to lead a dignified life and allows them to feel like they are a valuable member of their community. But in order to do that, we really have to go back to some of the themes that were raised yesterday in our opening session, thinking about whether we really want an equitable economy, we really want an equitable society, and are the decisions that we make and is the way that we govern our economy structured in such a way so that everyone, especially our young people, are able to get on that path.
I think, so the questions are, what does economic justice mean? And the other one was, what's an innovation economy? Is that right? Mm-hmm. I think that they're in conflict. Economic justice for me means that every individual has the opportunity, the right, and the tools to realize his or her full potential economically, right? Not just as consumers, but as producers, and find meaningful work. And that can come in all kinds of forms. My brother works construction. To him, it's what he's always wanted to do his whole life. You don't have to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant to have meaningful work. There's meaning in all kinds of work. We need to recognize that. We have, in the United States, fallen behind on equal opportunity. We all believe in it. It's core to the American dream, right? Equal opportunity. We hear about people who were born on third base and think they hit a triple. There's this sense of what is right. Because I'm rich or because I'm upper middle class, it's because I should be. Or if somebody's poor, it must be because they should be poor. They're lacking whatever it is to not be. This is a big problem. In the United States, we are actually losing ground in terms of intergenerational income mobility. This is a very important aspect, core to the American dream, that we would do better than our parents did, that we would move up the income ladder, that our kids would do better than us. Compared to all other advanced economies, the United States is lagging. We have lower intergenerational income mobility than France, Germany, Canada, Japan, falling behind. And this is our dream, right? It's not theirs. It's our dream. In the United States, the biggest determinant of your future income is not how hard you work, it's not how educated you are, it's not how much you play by the rules. It's the biggest determinant of your future income is your parents' income. And Paul Krugman said in the New York Times, I thought it was right on the money, we're on our way back to an economy dominated not just by wealth, but also by inherited wealth, in which birth matters more than effort or talent. This is a crisis. This is a real crisis. So when I think about economic justice, I think about we need to move the needle on intergenerational income mobility because that matters more than anything else. So how does it connect to the new economy, this innovation economy? I think it directly connects. What's happening today in labor markets, we don't have the tools to respond. Our educational institutions, our workforce development institutions, the way we provide healthcare, the way we do pensions, all this stuff is built on a labor market and economy that hasn't existed probably for 30 or 40 years, right? We have this intense volatility in our labor market. The Employment Development Department ran some numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actually does look now at volatility. In California, there are 1 million involuntary job separations every month.
Wow.
1 million job separations every month. And every time somebody gets disconnected from their job because the benefits are mostly employer-based, they're losing ground by 17% on average, right? So when they go back to the labor market, they're losing 17% of their income. So if you do the math on that, which I won't because I suck at math, you can see what's happening to the middle class, not just in California, but across the country, that we're just falling behind. And the innovation economy is driving this. So when we think about the way we reform institutions, the way we retool, the way we do work, and the kinds of skills that people need to be successful, it has to be relevant to what's happening now. So we've got to really deeply look at how we prepare people for what's coming and what's here now.
Thank you for that, Tim. So is the innovation economy driving inequity? I think is a great question for us to consider on the panel because this conflict that you point out, I think is a great one to identify, but I don't know if it's widely shared. And so if some of the panelists could weigh in on that, I'm looking at Decker and Brett to just see, where you land on this issue. I think that would benefit us all.
I mean, one of the things that struck me about what you said is I feel like we've also built the rules and the definitions off of false innovation. And so in supporting our fellows, oftentimes I get into conversations about innovative entrepreneurs, and we'll use Mark Zuckerberg and we'll use Bill Gates, and it's nothing against them and the ideas and the things that they've created, but it's let's really dissect the pathway to where they reach there. There were supports that allowed for them to drop out of school. There were supports that supplemented them leaving school. And so many of our fellows, like Kalima's in the crowd, Laura, who's not here, and some of the other ones that are working in STEM and technology and increasing the access within those fields, what they live in, what they dive into is how do you actually create a system that supports young people that are prepared for STEM careers and STEM jobs. And so it's not just having an idea and quitting college and then starting a business. There's mentorship that's involved in it. There's failing that's involved in it. There's learnings and taking from HP and taking from IBM that you apply at home in your garage that comes with it. And so I think when we talk about innovation economics or innovation economy, it's really talking about what are the rules that allowed for us to create that definition. And those rules were often built on outliers instead of actual people that live in our neighborhoods down the street, the people that live in the systems and schools around us. So now when we look for the outputs to compare ourselves to other countries, we're like, what happened? And actually, the system was designed to be ineffective or innovative or non-innovative. And so it takes, this is what I love CLASP, is it takes really dissecting the system and saying, okay, what do we need to create to ensure that there's a pipeline not only of prepared and equipped young people, but also a system that can perform at a level and then exceed.
So I want to let Brett take a hack at this question because cooperatives like Evergreen, Evergreen is, sort of the Cadillac, if you will, of cooperatives, but, they're sprouting up all over the country. And cooperatives are innovative approaches to job creation, worker owners. Can you say a little bit about this dichotomy?
Sure. So one of the things that we quickly realize, and I think what we're uncovering here on the panel today, is that although you may come to the table with the intent of being an entrepreneur, or you may come to the table with the intent of doing better, there's often challenges that make that prohibitive. And so what we see in the cooperative model is that not only are we looking for the marginalized individual to hire them, but we're also looking to make them owners and help them build wealth. So not only do we pay living wages, we pay twice minimum wage, but the idea is also that the profits that the company makes goes back and goes to them and goes to their families. And so when you take a look at an innovative economy and you take a look at the hurdles that are traditionally there for entrepreneurship and large contracts, I think that a cooperative model and pooling resources allows folks to come together and overcome those hurdles, whether it be working capital or whether it be insurance and bonding and that kind of thing. So as we look to innovate and as we look to figure out how we're going to get there, the cooperative model, the cooperative structure is a tool that just really helps out with that.
If I can turn back to this side of the panel, what are some of the ways that systems can play a role in supporting what Brett and Decker have just kind of outlined in terms of helping to create the pathway to opportunity? And I'll start with you, Rhonda, because CLASP has a great resource in the back for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it that outlines what a 21st century workforce delivery system needs in order to be successful in helping young men of color.
Okay. So I think there's several things that systems can do and should do to really ensure that they're creating those pathways. The first thing is having a true understanding of who actually is unemployed and why. There's so many times where people go by the national headlines of, okay, we know Black and Latino kids are unemployed, but community by community, it's different. And so those that run the systems in those varying communities have to have a fuller understanding of who is actually unemployed and why, what are the conditions that are causing it, and actually hearing those responses from the community as opposed to just the data that's on the page. So I think that's the first starting point. And the other piece is looking at what they have to do across systems and understanding that particularly for our young people, there are several systems with which they engage, and all of them purport to have the same goal of getting them on a path to economic sustainability and to living better lives, but doing it in different ways. But if these systems were working in concert with one another instead of against each other, that would really go a long way. So I'm talking about, our juvenile justice system and our child welfare system and our education systems and our workforce systems working in concert with one another. And the document that we have at the back speaks to that. It gives examples of communities where those systems work together, pool their resources, and actually create an employment pathway for young people that recognizes that there are barriers that may come in the way, but their resources actually are the things that remove those barriers for them. So I think that's another issue. And then looking more broadly at the communities in which they live and actually looking to create employment opportunities that come into the community for them is another piece of this puzzle. And then finally, systems thinking about what are the ways that they actually market these young people to businesses. How many of our businesses will not naturally employ our boys and young men of color of their own volition, but if our workforce system, for example, thinks about the ways that they create employment partnerships with business and then train the young people so that they are adequately prepared to enter those businesses and then market them as a viable population to be employed, they help to create the pathway for them.
So before we go to you, Tim, because
I can't follow that.
yeah, I know, but I'm gonna turn to you, but I want Alicia to go first because I feel like NCLR, with its broad reach, and all of the local affiliates that you're working with, I feel like you have an interesting perspective on the same question. And Tim, because you're a systems leader, I think it would make sense for you to sort of round out the comments on this particular question. So, Alicia,
Yeah,
would you
definitely. So, again, kind of giving you a sense of the structure of NCLR. So we are comprised of about 300 community-based organizations that are part of our affiliate network. predominantly Latino serving organizations in about 40 states. Some of them are here in the Bay Area. And, to Rhonda's point in terms of, being able to get that community perspective, I think particularly within the Latino community, I think it is key that community-based groups that are working with the population, that understand the cultural nuances, that understand the different barriers, whether it be around language, immigration, status, et cetera, that is key to really be a part of that conversation. I think oftentimes we kind of see these systems kind of playing at large, and it becomes a very top-down approach, whereas, I think many of us in this room probably know, the more that you engage the people, the eyes and ears on the front line, the people that work with the population on a day-to-day basis can really help inform the ways that you can effectively market the population that you want to get engaged, can really explain to an employer, kind of what are some of the challenges that you've observed in that population. Just kind of one quick anecdote, one of the groups that we work closely with here in Oakland, the Unity Council, they run a Young Men and Boys of Color initiative. And I don't know if Paul Flores is in the room, but there he goes. So he's the expert here and can definitely follow up with him. But, we had a really interesting conversation about some of the youth that he's, over the years been engaging. And, what use is it where you get a young person kind of engaged into a pipeline, let's say it's the tech industry, the innovation economy, and they're on their path to success. They're, an opportunity to get a job. Meanwhile, there's all these other factors at play that Paul is managing and balancing where, they're dealing with, a mixed status household. They're dealing with, a young person who may have to stop working because, his mother doesn't have the funds for childcare. I mean, just all of these different, barriers that this young person is having to deal with. Meanwhile, is trying to graduate, trying to get their foot in the door, trying to get the experience to be able to compete. But, a lot of those realities aren't always discussed. And it's really, again, these community-based organizations that I think are filling some of those gaps. And, I think that's another kind of complexity to kind of talk about. What role do the systems then have? The onus really is, should it be on that community-based organization to, clone Paul into basically 100 different people to try to, no, that's not possible.
So Brett had one quick point.
Yeah,
and then we'll go to
just on the notion of systems, what we're seeing in Cleveland is we're seeing these systems kind of come together and work very effectively. We're seeing community reentry folks, we're seeing folks come back to the community and then engage in a group called Towards Employment that gets them workforce ready. Then they come over to Evergreen with the Cooperative where they work. But then we have the Cleveland Housing Network and the Land Bank that provides homes at really reasonable prices for these individuals. And then we have some local car dealerships that are, really one in particular, Collection Auto, that's there to provide cars at an affordable rate. So when we take a look at a system and we take a look at comprehensively how the whole thing happens, one of the challenges that we see is, all right, so you're ready to go to work, but how are you going to get there, right? And public transportation isn't always reliable. We heard a gentleman today speaking about, or we heard the young lady today speaking about one more tardy and you were going to be out of school. So we know that systems are important, and the way the systems come together and collaborate is really what's important. And so when you have the Workforce Investment Board and you have large anchor institutions who are willing to support cooperatives, and you have these social organizations, when they all come together, I think you can have a really lasting and long impact. I think the one part of the system that we don't talk about enough are the anchor institutions. And for us, it's eds and meds, right? So it's our healthcare groups and it's our large educational institutions that come to the table and commit to long-term contracts for the cooperatives. And really, without those folks at the table, the cooperatives don't look the same, I don't think. And so when you talk about systems, you have your social pieces, you have your governmental pieces, but you also have your private sector pieces that need to play a really strong part in that.
Thank you for that, Brett. Tim.
That's right. I've heard so many great things about Cleveland. We talk about Cleveland a lot in California these days because there are models there that I think are real transferable to California and communities around California. So we're trying to catch up with what you guys are doing.
Okay.
I think on the first piece, Decker's talking about entrepreneurialism and the opportunity to start your own business and make your own success. I think we have to have a social safety net that's there to allow people the economic freedom to do that. So if you've lost your health insurance because you're not connected to an employer that provides health insurance, you're insecure. If you are unemployed and you don't have unemployment insurance that's going to take you through a training program for entrepreneurialism, then you're insecure. If you don't have a way to put money into a retirement account because you don't have access to that kind of institution, you're economically insecure. And when you're economically insecure, it's very difficult to have any footing to do anything else. You've got to pay rent, you've got to support your family, you got a mortgage, you got to put gas in your car, you got to put food on the table. All these things are first considerations. So if we can figure out a way, and I think we're getting there, healthcare reform was hugely valuable. And I proudly say Obamacare. This is the kind of thing, and we need to develop it out further, the kind of thing that provides the type of income security, economic security, that allows people to do what we're going to be doing anyway, because this is what the labor market's forcing. You're jumping in and out of the labor market multiple times. When my dad got out of high school, he went to work for a battery manufacturer in Kansas City, Missouri, and he can expect to stay there till he retired, right? They were manufacturing batteries for General Motors up north. That's not the case. You don't go to work for an employer and retire with that employer anymore. You're going to bounce in and out of the labor market very frequently. So if we don't have these supports, the kinds of things we want to do just aren't going to be possible. So we've got to work on that, and that's going to take legislation, policy, and this strong movement. That's that one piece. The second one is back to Europe. What's interesting about what they do there that I think we need to try to replicate here to some extent, we're not going to get it there all the way, is employers, the private sector in Europe, in Germany, in Switzerland, in the Nordic countries, France, employers, the private sector invests deeply in the education systems, meaningfully and early, right? In Switzerland, it's part of the culture. Young kids as young as middle school are doing work-based learning with companies where they may sometime down the road be hired to work. And this is creating a culture of work. So employers get these young people, they walk up to get an actual job. They've got experience. They know what it means to work on a shop floor. They know what it means to show up on time and dress right and do all these things because they've invested early on. They don't wait till kids fail before they give them the tools to be successful in the economy. Here, we don't do that. We don't do that. So we've got to figure out to somehow approximate the kinds of investments, public-private co-investment, early in education. In the United States, the private sector is disinvesting in education and skills. And then they complain about a damn skills gap. Right. And they say, why isn't our education system producing the kind of workers we need? But they won't invest. It's bull. We've got to figure out how to get employers to champion investing in schools early on, but all the way through. And I was really struck by what Rhonda was saying, because I think it's right on, and what Brett's been doing in Cleveland. California is a big economy. It's not a monolith. It's a bunch of regional economies. So if we could organize regionally big employers, primary employers, to champion investing, co-investing with government, deep and early in education, that's a big thing. Around the sectors that are growing, around the sectors that we project lots of job openings over the next 5 to 10 years. That's a good thing. The next thing we need to do is mobilize the public sector, the infrastructure, so we're all kind of at the regional level, we're all working toward the same end game. That means law enforcement, courts, social services, workforce development, working with economic development to create pathways through education, making sure there's a way to keep kids in school, and then connecting them to meaningful work experience well before they graduate. And this can be done. It's being done in Cleveland. It's being done across the country. It's being done across the state in places. The problem is we haven't taken it to the scale. We're losing. We invest $4 billion a year in California just in education, training, and employment services. Because it's not integrated, and because at the regional level we're not kind of firing toward a common end game, we're losing valuable scale. So until we can figure that out, we're not going to move the needle on intergenerational income mobility.
Thank you. So I want to ask one more question and then allow the audience to get involved and do some Q&A. And I'll have to ask you, unfortunately, to come up to the miniature podium here and state your question. We don't have a roving mic, so we want you to come up here because this is being live streamed and folks who are watching online can't hear you if you don't have the mic. So please come on up. So can you all say a little bit, I think, about the role of policy advocacy within this context? We've heard a lot about the different challenges and the responsibility that systems, the private sector have to addressing this issue. But how do we get there? And, you know, I see policy advocacy as one of those vehicles. And you know, in the broadest sense, right? You know, bringing people to the table, partnering with systems, working very, you know, closely with people who are in systems to be able to accomplish shared goals. I would put all of that under that rubric. And Tim, you know, you have specific experience, I think, with the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color here in California that you might be able to speak to. But I'm hoping that others can weigh in on this particular question too. So, any takers?
Well, I'll share one of the things that we do at CLASP around our policy advocacy work. We actually support a network of communities that have been doing this work for the last 10 years or so. And that network, there are about 15 or 20 communities that represent a broad spectrum of different types of areas around the country. We have some rural, we have some urban, we have some that are primarily Native American serving, you know, primarily Latino, primarily African American serving. And what we work with them on is really being able to document what they have tried to do in their communities and have done successfully, and sharing it with other communities across the country so that as they're able to change policy locally, they're able to talk with others about how they have changed those policies, and others are able to replicate some of that work. If they have been able to, you know, some of the work that has happened in Baltimore, for example, has been around bridging the juvenile justice work and the youth opportunity work, such that the youth opportunity centers are actually now probation and parole check-in sites. And the young people come there for their training, and they do their check-in and everything at the same time, but they're actually coming there for their training, and they're actually coming there for the opportunity to become employed. And so creating those kinds of synergies are some of the things that we ask the communities to share with one another. But the communities themselves also have become a voice for addressing policy at the national level. So they work in collaboration with our organization to be able to look at, so one of the examples is we've been working on this performance pilot partnerships piece that is happening federally. Those communities have a voice in the creation of the RFP for the National Performance Pilot Partnerships, because as a collective, they have a lot to share about what's working and what's not working on the ground.
Can you say what that is for people who don't know?
So it's an opportunity that was created through the president's budget to be able to get waivers for certain federal policies that exist within different agencies, such that those agencies are better able to work together in the service of young people. So unfortunately, there are no dollars tied to it, but it's an opportunity for them to be able to dismantle some of the things that make it a struggle for young people to get services, if they're able to show that there's a cohesive partnership that they have been able to hash out at the local level. Yeah.
So one thing I'll add, you know, just again, kind of larger picture of what's going on here. So I think, you know, work experience is something that we've also been looking at, and how do we make sure that young people are getting that meaningful work experience in an economy where there's a huge job shortage, right? I think oftentimes people don't realize that currently, as it stands, for every job that's being created, there's about 3 other workers that are currently competing for that job. So, you know, right now there's a need to really create good, meaningful jobs, one. And then I think with that is then looking at all of these integrated models where we're working with community-based organizations and, you know, community colleges, the workforce system, to really create summer youth opportunities and other experiences where someone can actually get a foot up, start getting that experience. Because right now, again, with this job shortage, you know, we risk putting a lot of these young people, especially youth, at a disadvantage. And just to kind of highlight that, I don't know if people realize that by 2050, 1 in 3 workers will be Latino. So, I think for us in particular, it's something that we're really looking at, especially given that we're the fastest growing segment of the labor force. So, I think it's key to really think about how we're going to create some of those jobs.
So from a policy standpoint, there's been a policy that I'm sure has been on the books for a very long time. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has said that, for every dollar that you spend, you got to have PAR workers or Section 3 workers, which are workers that receive HUD dollars and live in public housing. They must somehow be on the job to a certain percent. And what we found in Cleveland is that although that's the requirement, force majeure or this inability to perform by large contractors, they come in, they say, well, we found some folks, but they weren't skilled, they weren't qualified, so we had them wave flags. And so there are some policies that are there that can, when highlighted correctly, can become better. And so what we've done, working with Cleveland Metropolitan Housing Authority, CMHA, is we've said, look, we're a contractor, we're an employer. At the end of the day, Evergreen is an employer, and so we don't spend a lot of time on policy. There's a Democracy Collaborative that does that. But really, we were able to take that policy and leverage it up. And what we did was we said, we'll hire your Section 8 or Par 3 workers, and we'll put them on the jobs that you have. Because traditionally what you'll find is that there'll be a Section 8 worker, they'll want to get on the job, or they may even be an entrepreneur, but guess what they have to be able to do? They have to be able to be bonded, they have to be able to be insured, and the crazy thing you have to be able to do is, from a HUD standpoint, is you have to be able to carry the material and labor for 60 days. You're not going to get paid for 60 days, so how are you going to look at a small contractor to come in and be able to do that? And so, when you take policy, you have to really marry policy and the private sector and figure out how to make that work. And I just think that this HUD example is an opportunity in California and really in every state in the union for marginalized individuals living in public housing to actually get on the work site and get job skills, right? Because they're not just waving a flag, directing traffic. They're actually hammering, they're actually nailing, they're actually sawing. And so policy is important, but I think you really need to, when you're forming policy, you need to really think about how does that interface with the private sector, and what are going to be the hurdles, what are going to be the barriers, and what are going to be the workarounds? Because, honestly, all private sector companies aren't interested in the social impact that we're interested in, and so they're not making a concerted effort to leverage that policy up. And so the public-private partnership on the policy is important.
So, questions? Joe, you want to get in line, and then young man, you want to just line up? And Paul, please, just line up. And please, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. These are amazing examples of things that can work and ought to be brought to scale. But I'm convinced, and the elephant in the room to me is the conversation about politics. A waiver here, a waiver there, getting a little bit from HUD to do something that makes sense, that is working. If we don't take on the political challenge, these things that are working are going to down the vine. And I think what it comes down to is we have to begin to be boundary crossers to begin to talk about how we're going to grow the next generation of political leadership that have experienced what is working in the communities that you're talking about. That's a huge, huge challenge. And so it's more of a comment. I turn it into a question if you'd like. But what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, so I appreciate your question, and I don't know if Phil and some of the BMA fellows in the room. I think the biggest thing is when I talk about access for social entrepreneurs, I'm not just talking about money. And I think next generation leaders need opportunities to engage their ideas with systems. So oftentimes we'll give young people a venue, and they'll give them a room in the community center, but we won't give them time at the city council meeting. We'll give them a room at the community center, but we won't let them engage the board of trustees of the local community foundation. We'll give them a room in the community center, but we won't let them speak on a panel like we did this morning. And so the more and more that we can give young people opportunities to engage their ideas, to test them, to understand what's right, what's wrong, what's workable, what's not workable, but also let them be innovative with those ideas, and not just about funding the ideas, but like getting them out. That's how you think you build that pool of leadership. And then you give them mentors. And then you say, all right, what are the stakeholders that we need to engage to sustain some of those changes that we need to make? And then let them work where they work. And I think one of the exciting things about my job is I get to see these young social entrepreneurs in varying different fields, from energy to technology to criminal justice, work together and figure out, like, what is similar about our work? What funder am I working with that you need to talk to? Like, in the bar last night was pretty cool to watch them connecting with each other. And I think the more and more we have spaces like this where they can build together, you'll see that leadership, and it's just about, like, maturing and sustaining it.
I was getting anxious, and these guys are like, okay, you can go first. This is the question, right? It's the big one. I think we've got to do PolicyLink has done a fantastic job of this, and other organizations that PolicyLink works with. It's explaining in concrete terms that equity translates into economic growth. So equity is good for growth, and there's a lot of data that shows that this is absolutely true. Manuel Pastor and Chris Benner have done around the country work on measuring equity in communities and looking at how that translates into growth. So those communities that have greater equity have greater economic growth over time. So this is good. This is good stuff. And I think this is the kind of thing that even moves Republicans. I got to be careful about politics because I work for the governor and we're on film. But even Republicans will get behind an increase in the minimum wage because they get it that those that are smart get it that equity leads to growth. That if people have more money in their pockets, they spend the money in their communities, that drives economic growth. It primes the pump. This is all good stuff. It's what we talked about a little bit more. You got to, earlier, putting money in people's pockets. The second thing is, I mean, it does take a movement. And I think the movement needs to rally around something that people really can identify with. And this is why the State Workforce Board has come to around this thing of intergenerational income mobility. Income mobility, right? It's mom and apple pie. It's bipartisan. Everybody cares about equal opportunity. So we've got to have these kinds of big ideas that can galvanize people's attention. It's like sending a man to the moon for, to walk on the moon for the first time. The Apollo, that galvanized a country and investment around an end game that everybody believed in. We need that level. When we created the Apollo Alliance for 1 million new green jobs, it was the same kind of thing. That's why it was called the Apollo Alliance. The Van Jones helped to start. You've got to set these big goals, these big ideas that can galvanize support to help to mobilize the movement, and that can change politics. At a micro level, Prop 39 was big investments in improving school facilities. It was a green jobs initiative, but the way it was developed, green jobs is sort of this what they call a co-benefit. It was really about increasing energy efficiency and reducing energy use in buildings around the state of California. We've got some money. We worked with PolicyLink, got some money at the State Workforce Board to develop an initiative with a small amount of funds to connect local building trades councils and crafts with community-based organizations, primarily the Conservation Corps, to build pathways for young people in places with high unemployment to get into multi-craft pre-apprenticeship programs to become to get into the construction trades, middle-class jobs, accessible middle-class jobs that are often closed off to people who most need jobs in the community. What it's doing is it's getting counties and cities who were involved in deciding how public works is going to happen and who gets the work to start supporting project labor agreements and community workforce agreements, because it's connecting young people in high unemployment areas to real jobs. And that's politics at work. So there's a win-win for everybody. And the unions love this stuff because they're getting beat up, as they should, over lack of diversity in the crafts and the trades. And they have a hard time with local hire for all kinds of reasons. But they can get on board with this because it meets an end game for them. So that's kind of micro, smaller scale politics. But it's around this bigger sort of picture of equity.
And just real quick, Tim, I think energy efficiency is one of the larger opportunities for boys and men of color as it relates to entering the workforce and doing something meaningful for the next 10, 15 years. Energy efficiency, I think, is the landscape and sort of the platform where a lot of that can happen and take place.
Yeah, I think, so one thing that comes to mind in this conversation, though, and I think this may have been a point brought up earlier around kind of the role of business in this conversation. I think a lot of times we leave kind of private sector and business off the hook to kind of kind of go on and carry on as they please. But really, I think, when we're thinking about kind of engaging in this conversation around equity and economic growth, there's a lot of accountability that we need to be putting on businesses, right? You can come in and create a job, but again, the question becomes, what is the quality of that job? Is it really investing in the local community? Are you giving people the wages where they can then, kind of reinvest? And so, I feel like that's another aspect of the work that I think we need to revisit as we continue in this space.
Remove the box, right? That's what they got in Virginia, remove the box. I mean, I think that's huge.
Right.
Just thinking about the gentleman's point around creating new political leadership and then echoing some of the things that Decker was talking about, one of the things that we have strived to work on at CLASP is to help communities to utilize data in order to be able to create that new message that needs to be rolled out and that young people can be championing for themselves and their communities. And so we're able to pull together all of the national data for that particular community to talk about what really the need is and to make the compelling case, and then to point them in the direction of what are the entities that you need to be putting that information in front of. Is your workforce investment board comprised of people that need to hear that message? And the answer is yes. Is your Department of Education comprised of people who need to hear that message? The answer is yes. So making sure that they know what are some of the entities that they really have the ability to leverage to make change. The struggle that we have, though, is that we don't have community-based organizations often that we can tie to make sure that they are actually doing that work on the ground with the young people to advance the message, but we can provide the data.
So thank you all thank you for the question, and then thank you all for the responses. I don't think it's a coincidence that the most significantly affected in terms of unemployment are also the most politically disengaged oftentimes, and so I think it's important for us to make those linkages. I want to encourage people to keep their questions short and their replies brief, because we, as you can see, have a line. So let's try to get as many people to ask questions as possible. Thank you.
Well, my question is, how do we go through this paradigm from a civil rights mentality to a civil rights mentality? Among the black community, there's a $1 trillion spending power, but yet we keep talking about working instead of creating jobs by being entrepreneurs. So how do we take the skills that an individual developed and make that individual an entrepreneur that can create jobs in their respective community through micro enterprise and other funding sources?
Takers?
Sounds like it belongs up that table.
Decker, why don't you tackle that?
Is highlight. So one thing is highlight the entrepreneurs that are already there. I think that I was at a conference and somebody stood up and said, "So who's the top entrepreneur? Like, what's one of the top employers in Silver Spring, Maryland?" And it's a African American brother that owns 50 7-Elevens. He's an entrepreneur, and he's employing and training 1,000 African immigrants that are coming to the United States. And one of the things he talked about was that no one asked me for help. No one asked me to come speak to their groups when we talk about entrepreneurship. And so if we redefine what entrepreneurship is and highlight the fact that entrepreneurs already exist, I think CAP just put out a report that the amount of minority women that are entrepreneurs in the country and that have been entrepreneurs, and the economic impact of increasing minority women entrepreneurs, finding ways to highlight those that are already in our communities, but then also communicate the impact from a social standpoint.
And just real quick, we have to do business with each other, right? I mean, I think, I heard a story, it was a real short story. A guy walks into a store, it's a Korean store, and he says, "Look, I can give you the same products for 30% less." And the Korean says, "You blacks just don't get it. We're not buying from you, we're buying from ourselves, even if it's 30% more expensive to do so."
So I had two comments, but I'll limit it to one. This is actually a question. You guys were talking about like the private sector has to invest in their employees more, and I was reading this article about Howard Schultz, the Starbucks CEO, and he started like this initiative to invest in his employees in education. So for those working over 20 hours a week, they've agreed to like pay part of their tuition to go to school. And my question is like, do you guys think that this could be a trend for like the big corporations that employ thousands and thousands of people across the country? Do you think that they're going to follow suits, or you think that this thing won't work out?
I hope so. I hope it's a trend. I mean, it's no accident that in Europe you have this greater income mobility, and they invest early in education, and that we have less income mobility, and our private sector doesn't invest in education and skills training. So I hope what Starbucks will do, I mean, they're not going to change the world alone, but it could set an example, and they could be a champion for other companies to do the same thing. That's why at the regional level, if we could pick out a couple, we call them alphas, right? Big companies where a lot of smaller, medium-sized companies sort of have some relationship economically with the primary. If you can get the primary at the regional level to say, yeah, we're in on this thing, and champion it on behalf of the rest of the region, then I think we can get to scale with the number of work-based learning opportunities, paid internships, apprenticeship, that can meet the numbers of kids coming out of school or in school who need a valuable work experience. I think that's the only way, to be honest. I bet your second question was cool, too. Sorry to miss it.
Good afternoon. I think you brought up the question of pathways and linked learning programs for young people to get connected to jobs while in school. So here in Oakland, we have a linked learning program. However, that linked learning program is really only focused on the schools that are successful in creating opportunities for young folks to get into pathways. Whereas school like Castlemont High School 2 years ago graduated 25 people out of a class of 160 that started as freshmen, and they don't really have a linked learning program. So whereas a school like Oakland Tech has a very robust linked learning program. So what I'm wondering about is how do we create equity within our own public systems so everybody can benefit from best practices, right? And how do we then also get businesses and the private sector to invest in boys and men of color? Because I haven't seen any strategies around that yet. I see a lot of people complaining about our people aren't getting employed, offering all these solutions, but nobody is really like, I haven't seen the investment yet from the private sector in this community. So I'm wondering how we're going to do that.
So I think around the first part of your question related to the getting schools that are low performing to actually receive some of those same, structures in them, it really is about, making noise and about getting people, the folk that make decisions in our education systems to understand that those types of innovative learning opportunities work just as well for children who are struggling as they do for children who are high achieving, and the data bears that out. So being able to point to examples and data in other communities where they have taken low achieving schools and put things like linked learning or career academies or dual enrollment into those schools with the same exact school population, and how their graduation numbers have doubled or tripled. And there are examples of that across the country. So being able to identify those examples and bring them back to the powers that be and say, look, this has worked. The population of kids in this school did not change, but their outcomes changed. And we gave them all of the stuff that we give to the high achieving kids, and they showed us that they can do it. So I think that is, and I can be of help to you with that, around identifying some examples in other places where that's been happening.
Can I kick? I'll just real quickly. It's the scale thing again, getting employers to really come to the table. We have this challenge of schools try to, instructors often of career tech ed programs try to go to employers on their own. And we do that, multiple schools in a region, community college, multiple programs within schools, workforce boards are doing it. Everybody's going after the same employers separately, and it's driving them crazy. We've got to get one voice to go to employers and get that scale. So that's a big challenge. But the other thing, we've got to change the way career tech ed programs are funded because they're more expensive, and schools get funded by butts in seats, right? It's a lot less expensive to have academic classes than it is to have career tech ed classes. And we've tried to use mechanisms like the Career Pathways Trust Fund. We had $250 million in last budget. We got new money in this budget. but it's still just an initiative, and only some schools are going to be able to do it. Until we change the way these programs are funded, both at the K-12 level and the community college level, schools are always going to make the choice for the lower cost class, which is always going to be academic and not career tech ed. They've got to be smaller, they require equipment, they just cost more money.
Good afternoon. I work with young men and college students, and they're always asking me, well, Doc, where can I go in the country where there are more jobs, there's better opportunities? And could you all maybe name some cities or states that are doing these things a little bit better, that, you know, for people who are mobile, that they could, where they could go?
What city are you in?
I'm in a red state. I'm in Tennessee, Nashville.
Yeah, I'm in Ohio. You know, I'd be willing to talk to you and just and talk about how we can create jobs there. You know, I don't think that they have to leave their communities. They don't have to leave their families or communities. They don't have to leave where they grew up in order to be gainfully employed. We have to just come up with a new mechanism on how we create jobs for them. And I think, Tim, you're hitting the nail on the head when you're saying, you know, it's really about the anchor institutions and the anchor companies and their ability to step forward and say, look, we recognize the problem, and here's how we want to help. We want to give you jobs. And, you know, from a policy standpoint, sometimes you get into the situation where, you know, they can't hire felons. They can't hire if you have dirty piss. And I mean, so there's all these challenges. But what the Cleveland Clinic and UH and CASE have done is they said, look, we know we can't hire these people, but we know we can outsource the work to an organization like Evergreen, right. And where Evergreen has a tolerance to hire felons, and we have tolerances for dirty urine. So, you know, I think it's about how you. I don't think you have to leave your city in order to get it done. I think you just need to. I think you need to call Tim and have Tim come over and show you some cool stuff.
But by virtue of you even having to ask that question, or them having to ask that question, I think shows something that's very telling about, you know, just social networks and job opportunities, right? You know, these communities of concentrated poverty. People who grow up dislocated from opportunity just don't have the same type of access that I think other people do in different communities. And so that's something that we have to address as we think about strategies to, you know, provide opportunity for our young people.
Good morning. My name is Sammy Nunez. I'm with Fathers and Families of San Joaquin in Stockton, in the Great Central Valley. I'm here because I think that I hear a multitude of different challenges, right? We have our share. Largest metropolitan city prior to Detroit to file for bankruptcy. Large overrepresentation of folks in prison systems with the emergence of AB 109. They're coming home. All these brothers and sisters coming home. Not much has changed in terms of the economic landscape and opportunities, viable opportunities, right? This coupled with divisive politics and a distrustful community of people and systems and leaders. Now, but I think our situation is rather unique, in that we have a very good opportunity with our local Alliance for Boys and Men of Color that has really done a fantastic job of bringing all these different partners from multiple levels in our community around a very focused agenda, and that includes economic and workforce development. And so we have non-traditional partners coming together. I guess my question is, how do we take the circumstances that we're faced with and the real daunting task ahead of us and actually create a different kind of community and culture? And has this been researched? Is this a new phenomenon, or are we the petri dish for this? And how do we get more visibility in Stockton and the potential that exists there to really go to scale? I hate using the word scale, but to go to scale. And then also, if I may, just because it really does require, gentlemen from the California Workforce Investment Board, I really was intrigued by some of your comments, but I really do think that is not trickling down sometimes to the local boards sometimes. That's right. And we got to change those policies as well to infuse that conversation with folks like us that actually have, you know, something to offer at those tables. And oftentimes we're closed off. There's barriers to that, right? Right. So.
Yeah, I mean.
I guess that's a two-part question.
Yeah. But that piece, I think, is an important one, I think, for you, Tim, in terms of thinking about as the leader of all of the California WIBs, or Workforce Investment Boards, how do you sort of make sure that the direction and leadership that you have at the top is sort of permeating throughout the local workforce investment boards. And so I'll summarize it that way, but the first one, I think any of you can take a hack.
Just real quick on the workforce thing, we're kicking their butts. I've been in there 2 years, and we haven't made as much progress as I want with the workforce boards, but we require them to spend 25% of their dollars on training. In the old days, they didn't spend any money on training. It's the job training program for the United States, right?
Yeah.
And they weren't spending any money on training, workforce boards across the state. There are 49 of them in California. So we said 25% of your money has to be spent on training. So we know that training and skills gets better employment outcomes for especially low-income and underemployed populations.
And the best spend more than that.
Right, yes. We have boards in, like Sacramento spends half of its money on skills training, and they do a very nice job, and their numbers are fantastic. So we're kicking their butts in a lot of ways on policy. I have it I'm kind of pushing from the margins. I can change policy that they have to comply with. They also have to write local workforce board plans that reflect our state workforce plan. So we said, focus on regions, sectors. It's not just about you guys. You have to work with the community. You have to work with other partners. You got to, tie your stuff to, the growth industries in your region that are going to provide jobs, all those things. But what we're also doing is not thinking that they're going to lead the charge in regions. We're pushing this thing called Slingshot, which is, we hope, going to incentivize regions to come together, broad regional coalitions of labor, government, business, community, to drive toward some common end games that reflect the where the region wants to go over the next 5 to 10 years, right? In some cases, the workforce boards are going to be right there. In some places, they're going to play a secondary role. In some places, the coalitions are just going to kick their asses and make them do work differently. A lot of the workforce boards, I can't speak to San Joaquin specifically, but a lot of workforce boards come at this stuff from a very agency-centric point of view, and they say no to everything. You come in, you say, I have a great idea, and they say, no, our money can't be spent on that. And a lot of it's because there's just a lot of bureaucratic inertia around this stuff. And we're trying to break that free and get workforce boards to behave like they should have been when the system was created back in the 1930s, where it was a bunch of activists out there really interested in changing the nature of work and changing opportunity for people. And we've just become too bureaucratic.
Thank you. So
Marc, can
we
I
have
just
3 minutes.
push on one thing?
Yes.
And that's to say that one of the things I always like to make sure I say is that workforce investment board plans should not be afraid to have gender and race-specific goals in them.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Thank
Just
you
like
for
our
that.
state plan does.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So we have 3 minutes, folks. I want to do a couple things. One, encourage you to complete your evaluation forms. And two, we're just going to take all of these questions at once. And then those of you on the panel just sort of notate which questions you want to reply to. So we'll just do a round robin, and all three of you can just ask your questions, and then we'll move into hearing responses.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much. This is really great. Mine is kind of a two-part question as well, but I guess what I'm wondering, broadly speaking, are communities of color over-reliant upon systems at this point in time? We've talked a lot about systems work and what that means. Have we become too reliant upon systems reform as opposed to transforming the system on our behalf?
Yeah, right on.
And is it time for us as communities of color to begin to think about the innovation economy as an alternative communities of color economy with its own capital markets, which are owned and directed investment support and create the economic and academic safety nets which you all talked about? Thank you.
Great.
Wow, that's another workshop.
Right on.
He essentially said my question, but I'll just pose it a little differently, is that I feel a sense of caution when we talk about workforce and stop at income, and how can we make assets and asset building and ownership a regular conversation that happens every time that we talk about workforce, particularly when we're talking about communities of color, because wealth is really what allows you to be able to invest in these other things so that you can engage in the pursuit of happiness, right? So.
Hi, I just want to say that generational wealth, as she mentioned, is produced through entrepreneurship. So here's some data for you. All black-owned businesses in the United States produce less than 1% GDP. Add with the Hispanic-owned businesses, it's less than 3.5% GDP, producing less than 1% workforce. Yet, by mid-century, we'll be 42% of the nation's population producing less than 4% GDP. How do we change that needle?
I am a high school administrator, and I have young boys of color asking me all the time, Mr. Dunford, can you get me a job? And how is this, you know, when they look at the minimum wage and the different sorts of income that they're able to earn, compared to what they might be able to earn in the streets and in the hustle economy, how do we make this comparable for them and make it a viable option for them to you know, to go legit, so to speak?
Excellent.
Yeah. Who wants to go first?
I do.
Okay, Brett.
All right, so I want to tackle the second and third question. I think the question was, you know, how do we create wealth? And I think one of the things that you got to be doing is you got to be helping people get into homes. I mean, you know, if you're in Detroit or in Cleveland, you're in the Rust Belt, then you know very well that there's a ton of dilapidated properties or just uninhabited properties that can be turned around and given to folks in a really meaningful manner. So, you know, I think it's a system. Although we get a little trepidatious around the system, I think that there's some good systems out there that can help folks build wealth. You know, meaningful wages, right? So a good wage and opportunities to buy houses and cars, I think.
Others?
Well, I mean, one of the things that struck me was around kind of the transformation of systems and kind of the relying on systems to be transformed. And I think I don't know how much we kind of went into this, but we also have to kind of peel back the layers and look at what types of incentives are being put upon some of these systems, right? When we look at outcomes, so with our workforce development systems, you know, to what extent are we requiring them that people get access and placed in full-time meaningful jobs rather than, you know, part-time or some sort of kind of, you know, something that's not going to really put somebody on a path towards what we're all kind of talking about of kind of this long-term economic sustainability for them, for their communities. So I feel like I wish we had more time to kind of talk more about, you know, really what are some of the underlying issues when we talk about the kind of inner workings of a lot of our systems that are dictating, again, kind of what the outcomes look like, and then essentially having to work within those models and not having opportunities and say, no, actually, if we're going to tailor, because, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? We see that a lot of our community groups understand that a program that works in Cleveland is not going to be the same that works in East Oakland, that doesn't work in, you know, Massachusetts. So I think it's, you know, important to really figure out how do we kind of, again, push the needle from the community perspective of saying this is what works for our community. Let's meet each other somewhere in the middle.
I was going to echo what you were saying, just thinking about like some systems are working perfectly. It's just thinking about what they were designed to do. And so it's like when you start thinking about systems, like how do we go below that? And how do we start talking about logic models in a sense? Like understanding what are the inputs and then what are we trying to get out of the system? And then once we realize if that's not what we're getting out or what we intend to get out, let's just start breaking it down. And so I agree with your point, like thinking about as a community, is this system for us? And if it's not, how do we create something alternative, or how do we fix what's already there? And then on the asset building and ownership piece, I mean, I think that's, well, I'll tackle the last three together in a sense. From my perspective, it's clarifying the goals of entrepreneurship. And so, yes, there's the wealth building income perspective, but then there's also like the personal building. And I think your question about how do you convince young people to invest in, let's say, a job opportunity that may not be as lucrative as the hustle economy, I think that there's something different that entrepreneurs have gotten out of their roles beyond the money. And I think the role that they play in society, the role that they play among their peers as they're building something and communicating the challenges of building something is far and above just the monetary. And looking and watching some of our fellows engage with their mentors is something where you see that building, that community building. And so it's figuring out, and I would love to follow up about how do you connect those young people to those resources that can help them not just a job, but build with each other and with others.
All right, and
hold on just a second.
Okay, go ahead.
I totally agree with everything you just said, Decker. And the other piece I think of it is that young men don't choose to get into underground or illegitimate economies as their first choice.
Right.
You know, and that's, I think, a paradigm that we have to break for the general public. You know, they choose that oftentimes out of necessity for either having to provide for themselves or provide for their families in ways that most young people in affluent neighborhoods don't ever have to think about. And so, you know, thinking more broadly about what is the two-generation approach that we take in our communities to ensure that their parents are actually more actively engaged in being able to be employed or to be able to earn whatever that means for them is also the piece that we have to look at. So we're looking at the building of the full community and not just looking at these as independent pieces of a puzzle.
So,
And this is 10 seconds.
No, go ahead.
10
go ahead,
seconds.
go ahead.
All right, so when we talk about PolicyLink and entrepreneurship from Decker's standpoint, I think the one thing that we don't talk a lot about is supplier diversity and how these large corporations have these supplier diversity initiatives and goals, but they are suffering miserably at meeting them. And so as we look at how we're going to connect entrepreneurs with opportunities and entrepreneurs from our community, you know, supplier diversity, I think, is a really ripe area for us to be taking a look at. And as we put together programs and dollars for workforce investment, why aren't we, I mean, maybe Tim can give Decker's guys some money to go out and become suppliers and give them runway so that, you know, when Ford calls and says, hey, we need you to make this part, not only can they make the part, but they can also wait on the payment.
Yep. Thank you. So before we wrap, I just want to ask people to say a little bit about resources or networks or things that all of you might be able to plug into so you can learn more about what you just heard up here. We have some resources on the back dais right in front of or right next to the water cooler that you can peruse. But for folks who are doing great things that they want to share with people, I just ask for you to quickly say a website or a document and leave people with that.
Well, our document is at the back. You can connect with me through our website, www.clasp.org. You click on my name and can email me directly from there.
My website, I think, is on the website for the conference. It's not in the thing. It's cwib.ca.gov. And if you're looking for grant funds, we on occasion have money that we put out in solicitations, and we're going to have a couple coming up in the next several months.
You want to repeat that web address?
Yeah, right. It's cwib.ca.gov, California Workforce Investment Board.
Thank you.
So there is a newly released report in the back that looks at Latinos and kind of the new economy and what some of the assets that are at play and making sure that they're able to get access to meaningful jobs. Our website, www.nclr.org, has a lot of information, but if you do want to connect more with me directly, then I would just recommend approaching me afterwards. Thank you.
My email address is B, as in Brett, JONES, at evgoh.com, and that's evergreencooperatives.com as well.
You can find out more about the Black Male Achievement Fellowship, echoandgreen.org/BMA, and you can email me at decker@echoandgreen.org. That's Decker like Black and Decker at echoandgreen.org.
Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.